Hello and welcome to Dot Point P15, and today we're looking at outlining plant breeding systems and their genetic basis, including selective breeding, hybridization, and genetic engineering. So the important thing here is we work out what the genes are actually doing and how they are helping breed new varieties of plants. So here's the three things that we're looking at: selective breeding, hybridization, and genetic engineering. And some examples here are Granny Smith apple, which was developed in Sydney a long time ago, and it was developed from two different varieties of apple, one that was red and one that was like a yellowy color apple. It was developed together, and obviously it came out with a variety that is now very well known, but a lot of people like the taste of, and it kept and stored very well. So it's become very popular, Granny Smith apple. We've also got bananas nowadays that are quite uniform in their color and size. They're quite large compared to older bananas and bananas you get elsewhere in the world, and also fairly spot and blemish free. And that's happened through selective breeding of those plants. Hybridization, on the other hand, is actually combining two individuals of different species. So this one, selective breeding, is just choosing things of the same species to breed together. Hybridization is breeding two things of different species together. And it doesn't often happen because it's not able to happen in a lot of things, but there are some cases in the world where it's possible in biology. And examples are, if we're talking about animals, a mule is a cross between a horse and a donkey, and they are obviously different species, and they're infertile. They can't then reproduce any further. A plant example of hybridization is triticale, which is a cross between wheat and rye. And as we'll see shortly, you get a combination of the features between wheat and rye. So the key here is hybridization is crossing different species, and selective breeding is crossing two of the same species from different varieties. Genetic engineering, on the other hand, is taking individual genes or traits from any organism and putting it into something that's completely unrelated. And the difference here is genetic engineering can never happen naturally. It requires science and work in a lab to actually be able to for this to occur. And two easy to remember examples are golden rice, and it's rice that's had vitamin A added. It's to help improve the vitamin A levels in developing countries where lack of vitamin A leads to blindness. And so they've changed the rice to add vitamin A because obviously one thing they know people eat is rice wherever they are. And that will provide enough vitamin A. And they've also changed the color of it so that you can see what is in there, and the color itself isn't the vitamin A, but they've changed the color as well so that you can see what the rice is. And another example of genetic engineering is Roundup Ready soybean. So as we've said previously, Roundup is a herbicide, something you spray on plants, and it kills all plants. It kills every type of plant. Except what they've done is soybean, they've genetically engineered this soybean to stop it from being killed by Roundup. And that means that you can spray Roundup on a crop and it will kill all the weeds, but it won't kill the crop. So that's an important genetic engineering or use of genetic engineering in agriculture. So having a look at it a bit more detail. So selective breeding is the intentional crossing of two individuals from the same species. And basically you're seeking to combine ideal traits. And it's based on Mendelian genetics, i.e. you get dominant and recessive things. You get half of your genes from parents, like we do, half from mother, half from father, and you get the dominant genes ending up expressing themselves in that. So examples we've already said are Granny Smith and Pink Lady apples, which have been bred for different reasons, but for example, Pink Lady is to get more sweet, and bananas we've bred them to increase in size, thinner skin, sweeter taste, etc. The advantages of selective breeding are you have crops with improved qualities, so resistance to pest and disease, and increased yields and disease inputs, and increased things that consumers want, traits that consumers want in them. The disadvantages are you have a smaller gene pool compared to genetic modification or genetic engineering. Not all offspring have desired traits, and it's slow, and it can take generations to occur. Evaluation here is it's effective at improving yields and customer satisfaction by providing new and better varieties. And a non-plant example, but meat chickens are now 50% less time to maturity compared to 50 years ago. So now meat chickens are ready to slaughter in about 7 weeks instead of the 15 weeks it was, say, 50 years ago. Moving on to hybridization. So as I said, it's breeding between two genetically different individuals from different species. And this is the key here. Selective breeding was the same species. Hybridization is different species. Now, having said that, a lot of the advantages, disadvantages are going to be similar because it's still, in a sense, it's still selective breeding, but you're using individuals from different species. And we've already talked about the two examples, mule and triticale. And remember, for plant, this is your example here, triticale. Advantages: increased yield. You get a uniformity of the crop, which is what supermarkets want when you're providing produce for supermarkets. They often want, or they usually almost always want, the stuff that they get to be the same as each other. It looks the same, tastes the same, same size, same shape, because consumers tend to want the same thing. It will allow you to combine the best characteristics of different species naturally without any genetic modification. The disadvantages are the offspring are infertile or sterile, so the mule can't reproduce and triticale can't reproduce. Therefore, the cost of the seed is very high. The farmers must purchase new seed every year, and the danger is loss of diversity, which means a pest or disease could come along and wipe out entire crops quite easily. So evaluation is it's effective in combining ideal traits, example roots of rye and yield of wheat in triticale, and requires less land to grow due to improvement in yield. Example 1932, 111 million acres given over to gives 51 million tons of wheat, while with triticale 1994, 79 million acres gives 280 million tons. So that is what plant breeding has led to, and hybridization. The last one in the dot point, genetic engineering. So obviously this has only been done for the past 20 or 30 years, and it's where we take specific genes from different organisms and combine them. Usually one or two individual genes or traits are spliced into an organism and can be done by inserting genes onto virus and infecting a host. And I've already mentioned the examples. We've got golden rice, vitamin A rich rice for developing countries to prevent blindness. Roundup Ready cotton and soybean can spray herbicide on crop without killing it, and Bt cotton produces a toxin that kills Heliothis, which eats the cotton out of the plant, and so that's reduced pesticide usage by 80%. Advantages are we can fix really specific targeted problems, and we can target one or two traits only instead of just changing 50% of the genes like we do with selective breeding or hybridization. Almost anything can be changed. There's virtually no limit on what we can change. The disadvantages are there's irreversible effects. So once genes get out into the wild, they can't be stopped. We have possible negative impact on the environment. High cost, meaning the farmers have to get a better return on it. It's time consuming, and then the big one here is consumers are skeptical about genetic modification. They don't know the long-term effects, so a lot of people just won't. If they find out that something's genetically modified, they'll steer clear of it. So that's an important point there, the last one. The evaluation is it's a very successful technology. It works very well, and it has the ability to increase food production and feed a growing population. The example is Bt cotton has reduced pesticide usage by 80%, which is obviously good for the environment. Moving on to past questions, the question here, which of the following best describes the plant breeding technique known as selective breeding? So we've got crossing two existing varieties of a plant to produce a new variety. The answer there is A. Having a look here, this is an example of hybridization because we have two different types of a crop that are crossed together, and the answer is hybridization. This question, explain the advantages and disadvantages of using hybrid plant varieties, and it says explain. So hybridization is the crossing of two individuals of a different species, which combines qualities of both species. A plant example of hybridization is triticale, a cross between wheat and rye. And advantages include an increased yield and uniformity of characteristics of the crop, which lead to increased income as supermarkets prefer consistent produce and will pay a higher price for such, and helps combine the best traits of both. Example, roots of a rye and yield of wheat, resulting in crops that compete get better against other crops. So this is important here for the explain, showing cause and effect. Disadvantages include that hybrid offspring are infertile, meaning seed must be purchased each season and the cost of the seed is high, significantly increasing input costs. And that's the clear effect there. There is also a danger in the loss of diversity, as very specific genes are being used to the detriment of others, meaning if a selective pressure comes along, and this is the effect, such as a pest or disease, it could wipe out large amounts of food production. So I've explained there, I've shown cause and effect for both advantages and disadvantages. What is the name of breeding system which modifies a characteristic of plant or animal by inserting a single gene into its cells? And the answer there is genetic engineering. This question described two breeding systems that are used to improve crop production. So selective breeding and genetic engineering is what I've chosen here. And we just have to describe it. So selective breeding is a system of choosing crops with ideal characteristics and breeding them together within species. And this is the key here, it's not hybridization, to create a new variety with even better characteristics. An example is pink lady apples, which were chosen for their taste, sweetness, and color from original apple varieties. The second one, genetic engineering, also known as GE, GM, or GMO, however, is choosing one or two individual traits or genes from a completely unrelated organism and inserting them into another organism. The example is via insertion onto a virus and infecting the target organism. And so an example is golden rice, which has vitamin A producing gene inserted into it to reduce levels of blindness in developing countries from vitamin A deficiencies through rice, which is a staple crop. So I've put a lot of detail into that answer to guarantee myself the 4 marks there.